Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the Aptamella podcast to ease you into the day ahead on the election campaign trail.
What is Aptamel, Sam? Is this some weird thing you've been eating on the campaign trail?
It's a little yogurty drink that you have a sort of shot of in the morning. It makes you feel great.
Oh my God, you've been on the campaign trail too long, man. Have some bacon and eggs. My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as you can hear, is Sam Coates of Sky News. Rishi Sunak called the election 28 days ago. That is 4 weeks ago to the day. Did he have any idea what he was getting himself into when he stood in that rainy street in Downing Street and pressed the starting gun and all this? There are now just 15 days to go until polling day, 2 weeks tomorrow. Sam, I can see from the Zoom picture you are back in your house. Congratulations. The election is over for you, is it?
No, not at all. It does feel weird not to be out on the trail and to be in a kind of beige hotel room. I am going to miss this campaign when it's over. I think I'm probably turning into a bit of an addict.
I think it's a sickness, Sam. I think it's a sickness. I don't think this is healthy at all. Aptamel and hotel rooms, there's no way to live. Things with me are good. We're in the sort of the dog days of the campaign, aren't we, at the moment? All the parties have set out their messages, they've announced all their policies, and now they're just going to repeat them and repeat them and repeat them for the next 2 weeks in the hope that more and more voters start to listen to what they're saying. I still don't think people are massively engaged in this campaign, but I guess that will happen in the final days. But yeah, I think it's going to be get quite repetitive from here on in from the two main parties, don't you?
I think so. The rinse repeat part of the cycle is definitely on, and you can kind of see the power of the Tory campaign machine. Anyway, we've got another thing today. Happy YouGov MRP Day, Jack. That is the YouGov projection of what they think, this is the second of third, what they think is going to happen on July the 4th. It's released at 5 p.m, so that's when you'll be able to see me on Sky with those lovely seat-by-seat projections and the big picture unveiled. Now, I would say this, wouldn't I? There are so many MRP imitators, but this one is the original. But I do know that the campaigns are sort of whinging a bit that we will focus too much on the polls in this election. So what are our campaign headlines today, Jack?
Well, everybody's talking about the economy today, Sam, and that's partly because inflation stats are coming at 7 a.m. Now, we're recording this podcast slightly later in the morning than we normally do so that we can tell listeners what those inflation stats are, although they haven't dropped yet. But Rishi Sunak was certainly keen to talk to them. Labour are also talking about the economy today. They're out in a supermarket talking about the cost of living, but inevitably we'll be talking about tax as well. So big picture is economy. Up in Scotland, the SNP are launching their manifesto, big moment for John Swinney. And we want to talk a little bit about what Labour are going to be doing in Downing Street. How is the transition planning going, assuming that all these polls are right and that Keir Starmer will be heading into number 10 in just over 2 weeks' time? So we'll talk about that as well. But let's kick off with the economy. UK inflation is expected to go down this morning, but we'll talk more about that once the numbers actually drop.
In 12 minutes' time.
In 12 minutes time, we're sat there looking at the clock. If Rishi Sunak gets the numbers he wants, then he will be obviously very keen to talk about. Don't forget, Sam, that it was the inflation stats that triggered this election in the first place. It was coming down to what Rishi Sunak described as normal that gave him the space he felt to launch an election campaign and seize the moment and all the rest. Now, whether that was the right decision, I suspect, will be picked over by the Tory party for many years to come.
That's right. But I think that whether or not prices still going up by, for instance, 2%, even though that'll be a win in some senses, people's lives aren't necessarily about to get better. But the parties will be telling you that they, respectively, Labour and Tory, that they will make you feel better. You've got Labour, they're going to release their own cost of living stats today. But what they are most keen to talk about is the fact that they've now got a new big name backer, billionaire Tory who backed Boris Johnson in the last elections, given £500,000 to the Tories. But now John Caldwell, who founded Phones for You, is going to back Labour because of what he says is the Tory record of despair, whether it was what he says is Rishi's mismanagement of the economy or Boris's lack of ethical standards or impropriety regarding PPE or the Liz Truss debacle. Those are the things that he names this morning in a round of interviews as being behind his decision to defect. So that's something that the Labour Party will be using in order to sort of fly the flag of their economic credentials. But once again, Labour's going to be talking, have to be talking on the defensive about tax. Jack, do you want to explain why?
Yeah, just to say about John Corbell, what's interesting about this is at this point in the campaign, Sam, this is where you see parties rolling out the sort of big attack moment stuff that they've clearly been planning for months. And I suspect John Corbell has been up Labour's sleeve for some time and ready to deploy.
I think he was the name I was anticipating in the manifesto launch, but just delayed to a point where they get a bit more traction.
Oh man, you told us it was going to be a celebrity. I'm not going to lie, I wouldn't say class him as a celebrity. He's not quite sort of Taylor Swift waving in Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, is he? But no disrespect to John Corbell. I'm sure he's a great get for them.
If less good at twerking.
This let's hope so. This is the attack stuff. A bit like when they reeled out Mark Logan as a defector early in the campaign when Labour were under pressure over Diane Abbott and all that stuff. And the Tories similarly are rolling out their attack stuff today as well. And you've seen this secret dossier, and I'm putting that in sort of air quote marks. I'm not sure how secret or how much of a dossier it is, that the Tories have given to the Daily Mail today, which splashes across the front page, which claims to be a list of tax rises that Keir Starmer secretly supports. It's actually a document put forward by a group of Labour MPs called Tribune, which Keir Starmer was once associated with. Labour says it's not their policy. None of them are their policies, but nevertheless, there are some actual tax rises recommended in there, as I say, rejected by Labour, but nevertheless, the Mail are using that and the Tories are using that to say, look, here we have Labour's secret tax plans. These sorts of stories, this one, and I suspect the donor one, these HQs of these parties sit working away for months, coming up with these ready to deploy at what they see as key moments in the election campaign. How many of them actually cut through and change anybody's minds about the way they're going to vote?
I think when even my eyes glaze over, both at the attack and the defence one, the good news stories and the bad news stories, they all meld into one. I did it. One of them, I think, piqued my interest. Now, we've talked a lot of times about how Keir Starmer's claim he's not going to raise taxes on working people could get him into trouble because who knows what the definition of working people was. And yesterday on LBC, he was pressed on exactly that. And he gave, I have to say, kind of quite a sort of broad brush definition. He said, working people who will be protected from tax rises are people who earn their living, rely on our services, and don't really have the ability to write a cheque when they get into trouble. Their mortgages have gone up by several £100 and don't have the sort of money in the bank to pay it. Now, I'm not quite sure how HMRC is going to create a categorisation for that definition. That's the thing that's seized on by quite a few of the papers this morning as well. Tories say that means that millions of people are going to have tax rises. But I think it speaks to an imprecision in the way that the Labour Party have dealt with tax in this campaign. And they kind of deserve the coverage that they get because they ought to have nailed this stuff down better on what was always going to be one of their weakest flanks. And I am surprised that Labour haven't done better arming themselves and kind of preparing themselves on this subject in this campaign.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's that bit about people who don't have the sort of money in the bank to pay for it that lots of papers have seized on today. And that's because I think what Keir Starmer is really just trying to say is like waves vaguely normal people, like normal people going to work who haven't got much cash in the bank. But the papers have grabbed that and the Tories have grabbed that and said, look, if you've got savings, i.e. you do have cash in the bank, then Keir Starmer is after you. I mean, part of the reason for the vagueness, Sam, surely, is that they just don't really want to spell out exactly what their tax plans are. They don't want to tie their hands in all the sorts of ways that the Tories are trying to do because they want the flexibility to raise tax rises and they think they can get away with it and still win. And probably that is what is going to happen. But you're right. And in terms of the attack stuff, I completely agree about eyes glazing over about tax dossiers and all the rest of it. But the idea from the Tory campaign is they hammer this message every day in all sorts of different imaginative ways and sometimes extremely confected ways. At some point in the final week of the campaign, it starts to drip through into normal people's minds that they get this vague sense that Labour are about tax rises, and that might start to put people off voting for them, even if they haven't really got specifics in their mind about what it is Labour are trying to do. These campaigning is done in such primary colours. You're just trying to get a very basic message into people's heads, and that is what the Tories are trying to do today and yesterday, and they'll be trying to do it tomorrow and all of next week, and we're going to be hearing it again and again and again.
We're counting down to 7 o'clock, so let's rattle through the SNP. John Swinney, mid-morning in Edinburgh, he's the third SNP leader in this parliament. He's launching his election campaign. He is making a massive virtue of the fact that the SNP are publishing the most left-of-centre manifesto of any mainstream parties. He's putting opposing cuts at the centre of it, more investment in the NHS, partly more investment that he can do, but also basically saying, vote SNP and we will ask the next UK government to increase NHS spending by £10 billion each year. Sort of good luck with that. Is Scotland going to get more investment with SNP MPs or with Labour MPs? It's always quite hard to tell. I'm not sure quite how well that campaign line will land. But it's interesting because he's also got the hard task of defending 17 years of being in power in the Scottish Parliament. So a more difficult manifesto launch for the SNP than any of recent years.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And it's easy to lose sight of the fact, given we're all so enthralled by what appears to be a total collapse of the Tory party, although caveat, there's still 2 weeks to go. It's easy to miss the total collapse of the SNP's dominance in Scotland. The latest MRP poll, and I'll hold my breath for the YouGov one, which is the OG later today, but the latest MRP poll from other polling company has SNP on 15 seats in Scotland. I mean, that is an extraordinary result if it were to be borne out. Anything like that. This looks like the end of the SNP's dominance in Scotland after a very long period, and it's hard to believe that anything that Johnny Swinney's going to unveil in his manifesto launch this morning is going to turn that around, not least because I suspect most Scottish people's attention is not going to be fixed on a small conference room in Edinburgh today, but rather going to be fixed on Germany, because Scotland have got a massive game in the Euros this evening that they absolutely need to win, or at least get something out of, and I do rather think that the nation will be far more interested in that than the SNP's plans to scrap the 2-child limit and the other benefit stuff that they're very keen to talk about. Sam, there's another manifesto launch today as well that we shouldn't neglect. Your old pal George Galloway. I'm sorry you're not up there for that, really, after you two got on so well during the Rochdale by-election. What do we know about what George Galloway is going to announce? Does he have policies, or is it just sort of shouting about the Middle East a lot and trying to create as much attention as he can?
So he's trying to hang on to his Rochdale seat. And he's going to launch the Britain Deserves Better Workers' Party manifesto in Greater Manchester. I think it is primarily trying to hammer home. Essentially, I think the Middle East is going to be at the heart of their campaign. I have to say there's not a lot of coverage about it yet. There aren't any previews that I was able to spot in the papers this morning. So we might come back to it tomorrow. Talking of the left, by the way, the left is a little uncomfortable with Keir Starmer. We know that. Unite, the biggest union backer of the Labour Party, is pumping out lots of election material at the moment. Somebody got in touch to say, whether you look at their social media or whether the emails that are coming out, none of it says actually vote Labour. And they think that's the first time that's happened in 15 years since Unite was founded. Here you have this gigantic union, and they are backing Labour, even though Sharon Graham, the General Secretary, didn't sign off the manifesto. But they're doing it quietly, which feels pretty extraordinary. And I think that speaks to the greater kind of fracturing of the left post Jeremy Corbyn and the enthusiasm or lack of it from many in the left towards Keir Starmer.
Sam, you want to talk about Labour going into government? I mean, if all the polls are right, that's what is going to be happening in just over 2 weeks' time. So the preparations, you would hope, are very much underway and in train and in good shape within the Labour Party. They've been preparing for this for years. What do you reckon? Are they going to hit the ground running, assuming that they do win?
Well, this was all the main subject under discussion at the annual Institute for Government bash last night that I was at, and I was talking to people there. I've been talking to people for a couple of days. Labour folk were there, civil servants were there, campaign groups that are dealing quite closely with Labour were there. Now, it's important to say Labour's keeping their plans quite tight, so this isn't a confirmed set of facts, but here's the kind of sum of the knowledge that I gleaned largely last night. On the Labour side, I think there's still talk of Keir Starmer going into number 10 with Sue Gray potentially largely in charge of policy delivery, with campaign chief Morgan McSweeney going in as well to oversee the Starmer political project. So it's not the case that having completed a campaign, he will go on elsewhere. He will continue the political project from number 10, seem to be the suggestions from one Labour person. They absolutely acknowledge the first year is going to be bumpy. That is a word that Labour use. But to try and smooth things over politically, I heard again a suggestion I think we first got in the Times a few weeks ago about this quad that runs the Labour Party, a Labour government, with Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves and Pat McFadden. This is sort of based on the coalition quad years. You remember Nick Clegg and Danny Alexander with David Cameron and George Osborne would make the key decisions. This would be Labour's equivalent. Really quite varied reports, though, on how ready Labour is and how well the transition talks, where the party puts their proposals before civil servants to kind of thrash it out. Everybody I'm speaking to says that Labour's plans are quite woolly and vague. Some civil servants are quite phlegmatic about that, says that's fine, it's their job to sort of work them into specifics, so long as politicians know priorities. But others are quite concerned, and there's a specific concern that there's quite a bottleneck around Sue Gray, and she likes keeping things quite secretive, and that means that officials don't have enough detail of how to work. Let me give you one example. Clearly, negotiations with the EU are going to be a big thing in the next Parliament if Labour get in. At the moment, that's the job of Nick Thomas-Simons out of the Cabinet Office. But that's left the Foreign Office wondering what on earth is going on with them. Does David Lammy oversee that or not? Does the Foreign Office do EU relations and EU renegotiations, or is that going to be split out like it was under the Tories with David Frost? The whole structure of how relations with the EU work aren't nailed down with 2 weeks to go. And this is urgent because the moment Keir Starmer comes in, if he comes in, he'll have to go to a NATO summit on July the 9th, just 4 days after walking into Downing Street if he gets there. And then on July the 18th, there's this big summit in the UK, the European Political Community, where supposedly all these European leaders come along and see him. So at time of speaking, with 1 month to go until that, nobody knows how stuff to do with Europe is going to work if there's a Labour government.
In the last few moments, Sam, the Office for National Statistics has tweeted that CPI, the Consumer Prices Index, inflation rose by 2%, down from 2.3% last month. That means that we have officially hit the Bank of England's target for the first time in goodness knows how long. That means inflation is down, and that means Rishi Sunak has something positive to say on the campaign trail today. So when he goes, he's got an LBC radio phone in, he will be keen to shout about some good news for the economy. This idea that the plan is working and you don't want to go back to Labour will be trumpeted once again. I don't feel like that's a message that's landed terribly well. Every focus grouper I've spoken to says that when you talk to the public and say the Tories say the plan is working, they just start laughing and ask what on earth are they talking about. But here is some evidence that some sort of plan is working, because if inflation really is back to normal and continuing to go down, then that is obviously good news for people who have been feeling the squeeze for a very long time now.
Well, that's it from us. I think we ought to leave you to get on with your day. Jack, are you doing anything special today?
Oh, catching my breath and trying to figure out how we cover this election for the last 2 weeks. We've really been running since the very start. No one was ready for this. Actually, I did speak to one ambassador of an overseas nation who told me he'd had a flutter on a July election ages ago and got 11-1 odds. So maybe some people saw it coming, but we certainly didn't.
We're all building the bridge as we run across it. Well, we'll keep building the bridge tomorrow morning. We'll see you then.
See you then.